Okay, in our last little video, we started talking about what biology is. It's the study of life. And then we started classifying what it means to be living. And there's 10 characteristics. Now, there's more than 10, but there's 10 that we've defined that every living thing has in common. And we talked about the first handful in the last little video. So, just as a quick review, the characteristics of living things, the first couple are going to be that they're going to be made up of cells, right? And you can either be unicellular or multicellular. Uni means one cell, multi means many. We talked about the fact that in order to be living, you had to be able to reproduce, which is forming a new organism, right? And that could be done either through asexual means, where one organism just splits into two identical new organisms, or it can be sexual, in which two individuals are going to reproduce together to make a new genetically different offspring. And in order to be living, things have to have a universal genetic code. And what that means essentially is that everything living has DNA. And that DNA is a code which is going to determine all of the physical traits of that organism. We also talked about the fact that living things have the ability to grow and develop, so they can grow in terms of physically get bigger, or they can become more complex. We also finished up on the idea that organisms need energy, right? Everything that we do requires energy. And the way that we get our energy is through a process called metabolism, where we take in fuel. So in the case of us humans, we eat food, right? We need sugar, we need proteins, we need fats, and all those food particles get broken down in our bodies and then get used to make energy, right? Usable energy. And that is done in all living things. Now here's the new information. A couple more characteristics. One thing that all living things are going to be able to do is respond to their environment. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is if the environment changes, they have sensory organs that are going to pick up on those changes, and then they're going to they're going to react to that. So, for example, if you walk into a room and it suddenly is cold, it gets very cold, you're going to respond by putting on a jacket, right? Or if someone comes up to you and puts their finger in your face, you're probably going to swat it away. Someone calls your name, you're going to react to it. Well, all living things respond in some way. You might be thinking to yourself, well, what about like a plant? Plants can't move. That doesn't mean they don't respond, right? So, for example, trees lose their leaves. Certain trees, deciduous trees, they lose them based off of the length of the day. So as it gets darker earlier, that triggers a response. Or even something like bacteria is going to respond. If you take bacteria and put it on a petri dish and you put an antibiotic in the area, that bacteria is going to start to react to that antibiotic. So anything alive is going to respond to its environment. A rock, on the other hand, is just going to sit there. You can kick a rock all day long and it's not going to react to it. So all living things are going to be able to respond in some way to their environment. Sometimes that response isn't going to be visible. Sometimes it's at a metabolic level where it's just a chemical change, but something happens. So they're going to use their senses to respond to the stimulus from the environment. Everything living is going to maintain something called an internal balance. So this is a little bit confusing, but we've all experienced this before. So what does internal balance mean? Well, internal means inside your body, right? And then balance is keeping things at a point where they are where they belong. So, okay, let's talk about that. You've all felt uncomfortable in situations, right? So let's say the first day of school. Oh man, that is a stressful experience. Now, this is not your normal school year, but first day of school, you're going to walk into that cafeteria and you're going to hope that you see your friends, right? You're going to be carrying your tray. You're going to be all nervous. You're going to be looking around and feeling really bad. And you're scanning the cafeteria looking for that table of people you know. And oh man, I don't see anybody I know. I don't have any friends in this lunch. And your heart just starts to fall, right? And you feel terrible. And you just start to sweat and shiver. And then all of a sudden you see, oh, there's one of my buddies. And then bang, you feel great. You walk over, you sit down, and you feel okay, right? That is a feeling of balance. So all living things go through a process called homeostasis, right? Stasis means to stay the same, and stasis means to stay, and homeo comes from homo, which means same, right? So homeostasis means to maintain a steady internal balance. So where do we see this? We're going to see this with temperature, right? If somebody were to pump up the thermostat in your room right now, your body would respond by starting to sweat, right? So we have our friend Homer here, right? In his brain, we have a little part of our brain called the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is the part of our brain which registers things like body temperature and blood sugar and how tired we are and how awake we are. That all gets regulated by our hypothalamus. And what happens is if the body registers that the temperature has gone too high, our body can only function in a very, very small window of temperature. If it goes up or down too much, it becomes very dangerous. So we have something called a feedback loop, all right, or a feedback mechanism. As our brain registers that our temperature is too high, that's going to trigger us to sweat. And then when we sweat, it's going to cool us down and we're going to get back to normal again, right? Or if, for example, our body temperature is too cold, we're going to shiver. And we're going to do things like shiver, and our blood vessels are going to start to contract and pull the blood to the center of your body to try to warm you up. That's why if you've ever noticed, if you're very cold, your skin gets very pale. And if you're very hot, your skin gets very red. Because when you're very hot, your blood gets pushed to the skin to cool it down. So that is called homeostasis. Great example is your blood sugar, right? If you haven't eaten in hours and you're just starting to feel weak, your stomach's going to growl. You're going to start to get this feeling that we call hunger. That is created by the brain to tell you, hey, it's time to eat because our blood sugar is too low. And then finally, all living things are going to change or evolve over time. So if a species is alive for a long time, over that time period, they're going to change to become more complex and to evolve to fit their surroundings. So everything that's living is going to go through a process that we call evolution. Humans don't look the same as we did 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, right? If you've ever been to Philadelphia before, which I'm sure most of you have, and if you've ever gone on any of those historical little tours where they take you through Old City, one thing you probably noticed is the houses look a little different than the houses in other parts of the city. The doors are a lot smaller. So why would the doors be smaller? Well, because people were smaller. Humans have actually gotten taller over time. So over time, through selective pressure, humans have gotten taller. So that's an example of how a species evolves. And we're going to be talking a lot about evolution, as you could probably imagine. It's how we finish off the year. And it's actually one of my favorite things to teach about because it answers so many questions as to why different organisms have similarities and why different organisms have differences, right? So just to recap what we talked about in this little lecture here, I reviewed what we talked about in the last lesson, and I talked about these three new ideas, right? So all living things have some form of a sense, right? They have senses. We have our hearing, we have our sight, our smell, and those senses allow our brain to register our environment, and then we are going to react to the environment. So for example, if you suddenly smelled smoke in your room right now, and you looked around and you saw a little smoke coming in under the door, your brain would register that as fire because you know what fire is, and you would get the heck out of there, right? That is a response to the environment, and that's true of all living things. Even organisms that you think can't move, they have the ability to move, like plants. Another thing that makes a living thing is this idea of homeostasis. There is a balance that exists in our body. Our body's made up of trillions of cells all working together. And as you can imagine, it takes a certain environment for that to go the way it's supposed to go. So we have to keep our blood sugar where it needs to be so that our cells have the energy that we need. We need to have our body at the right temperature so all of the little mechanisms, they work the way they're supposed to. We need the right amount of sleep. You know, if you've ever not slept, you know how you feel. And then finally, all living things are going to change and evolve over time. And that is this idea we call evolution. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as the year goes on. Thank you very much.